Hey everybody, Eric here again with my speech analysis video. Took me a while because while I was watching the speech after I made decision to watch the speech to join Congress, I have let's see, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 7.5 pages of notes from the speech. Right off the top, it is the longest speech to a joint session of Congress ever. The previous record was held by Bill Clinton during his presidency. Sorry about the dry throat. All right, so let's dive into it. So, right off the top, I was watching it on ABC News Live, and they were talking about the theme was supposed to be the renewal of the American dream. The American dream is supposed to be about a family, a nuclear family, mom, dad, son, daughter, living in a home that they own, picket fence yard, cars in the driveway, good jobs, great schools, and opportunities. At least in my mind, that's how I was told what the American dream was. Of course, the American dream has expanded. Sorry, my phone was going off. Since then, when I was in school, maybe 45, 50 years ago. Yeah, that's right. That's accurate because I'm approaching 63. So, yeah, that's accurate. So let's move on. So he opened with talking about the stock market and information, and they were talking about the stock market previous to the start of the speech. And I have a chart here that actually shows the stock market from January 17th, from January 17th through March 5th. Now, January 17th through February 20th was still technically under the Biden administration. So from here all the way back, and as you can see, um, ups and downs, ups and downs, yada yada. And of course, you can draw a line to the elections and the announcements of what he was going to do, and yada yada yada. And so, again, inauguration day, February 20th. The day before, it was up here. Then it start going down. All right, leveled off right around 2 days before the end of the month, and then dropped down deep on February 28th because of tariffs, firing federal workers, and so on and so on and so on. And then it went back up on March 2nd and then started going down again because, again, the tariffs. And on March 2nd, this past Tuesday, the tariffs started right before the speech, right? Right before the speech, and then kept it going down until yesterday. And then after midnight, when the announcement was made, President Trump paused the tariffs. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So then Margaret Taylor Greene, um, the camera was focused on her, wearing a political hat again, which is, it violates the dress code for the chamber. There are not supposed to be any political hats and things like that inside the chamber. That's the thing. Now, on the Democratic side, they some of the Democrats were wearing T-shirts, um, were covered up, and then when they decided to walk out, they took their jackets off while they were walking out, saying "resist." So technically, they were violating the dress code, but the difference between them and Margaret Taylor Greene, and she was the only that I saw, the only Republican wearing that hat. That's the difference. They were walking out, and she sat down on her butt with the hat on there, and she always does that. And she was not censored or anything. I think they talked about that in his first presidency, but now that he's back in his second presidency, she's wearing it. So the balance. Look, you're the speaker. Mike Johnson is the Speaker of the House, and so if you're censoring this person, then you need to censure this person. But he didn't do that. So let's go on. So um, the podium, he started walking in towards the podium about 9:17 p.m. Trump, and he was shaking hands and so on and so on and so on, and got down to his cabinet, and Secretary of HUD was talking to him when he was talking to someone else, looking directly at someone else. The HUD secretary had his hand out, and based on my recollection, and while I was watching it, I was like, interesting. Because not only did he not talk to the Secretary of HUD, he didn't shake his hand either. And I will give you this nugget of information if you don't know. The HUD Secretary is the only black member of his cabinet. And it's not the first time he's done that either. So just leaving that out. So then he got up to the podium with the applause on the right, and J.D. Vance in the back and Mike Johnson in the back applauding. And then he opened. His first thing is opened after he was doing his thanking and said, "America is back." And applause, 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 applause. So he said also his first 44 days, he's done more in those 44 days for America than Biden has done in the last 4 or 8 years, which is not true. I mean, you would have to be blind and deaf not to know that. He's touting of his first 30 days of all his executive order actions that he wrote. And some of them are going through the court system based on possibly being unconstitutional. But he didn't say that either. He didn't talk about that. And so a comeback from what? He started talking about the election in the fall, saying that it was a mandate from America to do what he said he was going to do. And I'll remind you, the words did come out of his mouth about rounding up illegal immigrants, shutting down our position in some of the organizations on the world stage, as well as making government smaller. But he didn't say anything about firing workers. Then he talked about winning the popular vote. Got more votes in history. He always used that phrase, in history. He always does that. But no, he didn't get the most votes in the popular vote in history. He did not. And he got boos from the Democrats. He did. But then the boos were drowned out by the Republicans. And the reason that was is because Not all of the Democrats were on their side. They were not in the chamber. Some of them didn't show up, and that was a type of protest, which I agree with in part, but I disagree also in part. And so while Representative Al Green from the state of Texas did interrupt the speech, and he was kicked out because he kept interrupting, and he got out, he got kicked out. And on a side note, you would think that we were in a college or professional stadium, football stadium, at a game, and the winning team then starts singing the goodbye song, na 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 na, na 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 na, goodbye. Yes, your Republican, not mine, your Republican representatives were doing that in the chamber. They were doing that in the chamber of the House during a joint congressional meeting for the president's speech. Yes, they were doing that. And so the disruption happened. Representative Al Green got kicked out. Videos are all over platform. Today he was censored. Again, President Trump claimed that his first 30 days were more successful than any other president in the history of the United States, except the first president, George Washington. So then at 9:29, he started talking about the border, talking about February crossings are the lowest ever in the history of this. Well, I have another thing to show you about that. That is partially true. I pulled up SAN, Straight Hour News, unbiased and straight facts. They reported, based on the data information they got by Axios, that illegal border crossings dropped significantly in February, with U.S. Border Patrol apprehending 8,300 migrants, according to Axios. This marked the lowest number since fiscal year 2000. Now, a note about that. The year 2000 is when illegal immigrant crossings started being tracked. So we have no idea how many crossings happened nationally before fiscal year 2000. And again, President Trump praised the drop on Truth Social, calling it the lowest number of illegal immigrants in history. And again, the tracking started in 2000, so this is only partially true. All right? So then he said that Biden was the worst president on immigration. He was talking about, yet again, Biden left, murderers, rapists, the worst mental health criminals, and so on and so on. Let them in the country. Said millions of them. Again, we don't know that, except for one-offs that happened where criminals did kill and murder American citizens, rounded up, and then processed to be kicked out. However, every time, some of them kept coming back into the United States. That is a true story. You could also see behind him when he was talking about Biden and then pointing to the Democrats, that Vice President J.D. Vance and House Speaker Mike Johnson were smirking behind him like they were 5-year-olds. He also touted, he evoked MAGA, Make America Great Again. Democrats did not applaud, did not stand up, but they did have paddles in the audience, some of them showing protect Medicaid, protect Medicare. Someone had signs that said false, would hold it up when he was lying. Other people were on their phones. Now, as a note, it was announced today that Minority Leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, had asked people not to visibly protest. He wanted everyone to be in the chamber to show their disdain for President Trump and just sit there with their facial expressions, knowing that he was lying to the American people while he was talking. And so the Democratic Party, it's not new. It's not shocking. But the Democratic Party is split. It is. And there are what I call the legacy Democrats, which I used to be a part of, meaning that I always called myself an independent voter that was a little left of the center. Not that far away from the center, because I always said that I was fiscally conservative and socially progressive. And so I'm not all the way over to the left, but I am more progressive today than, say, I was 10 years ago. But there is a split in the Democratic Party, and they need to get their crap together because we are less than a year away from the 2026 election cycle to take back the House and the Senate. And if they don't, they're not going to get it back. So then, after he was talking about making America great again, he did not talk about the federal freezing on hirings or firings, but he did talk about freezing foreign aid, to which there was thunderous applause from the Republican side. However, as of today, I believe it's today or yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled against him, saying that he cannot freeze $2 trillion in foreign aid, that was illegal and unconstitutional. And so that money has to go out. Because if it doesn't go out, as Elon Musk said in the first cabinet thing, that everybody makes mistakes. And the mistake that he was talking about was when they put a freeze on Ebola vaccination education. The worst disease on the planet. The fastest killing disease on the planet. And they put a hold on it and withheld medicine. Which means people died on their watch. Research that, because that was in the news too. But he did talk about he said that he removed the United States from the World Health Organization, from the Paris Climate Accords, from the UN on Human Rights Commission, and he has shut down and stopped Joe Biden's EV mandate, again, to thunderous applause. Which means we don't get information as fast as we can through the World Health Organization about health issues going on in the world that could affect the United States, which would have been under RFK Jr.'s watch as the newly confirmed Secretary of Health of Human Services. Now, here is where he did talk about the economy, but not about the economy for the middle class, the working, and the working poor. He talked for a minute or so, saying that for every new regulation that goes on the book, there should be 10 old regulations that should come off the books. And from my standpoint, and I'm not the smartest cookie in the jar, I'm not. But based on some knowledge that I have and some research I've done, that is a signal that safety protocols are going to be removed for the sake of production and money. And talking about fracking, coal mining, He did not yet. Later on in the speech, he did talk about drilling, so that will be more drilling in the Gulf, and drilling in the Alaska area and off the coast, off the West Coast. So that was a hint at that I think most people didn't get. Um, he did also taught. He was taunting the Democrats about how he didn't go to jail. He is a convicted 34 count felon, and most thinking people know that the whole reason that he ran for president anyway was so that he couldn't go to jail, and kept pushing and pushing and pushing his sentencing dates all the way up to the last 30 days of the election cycle. And there is a rule from the Department of Justice that they do not prosecute people, political people, during those 30 days. And so he got off the hook, and the judge decided to set aside the sentencing until he's no longer the president. And for right now, he can only be president this term because he's already served one term, and a president can only serve 2 terms, whether they're consecutive or not. Then he claims that he is the president who has brought back free speech. He touted that he did an executive order making English the official language of the United States. That he's proud that he was able to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which really doesn't do anything. The Gulf is controlled by the United States, not by themselves. Mexico has something to say about that, and Cuba. So again, he's touting all these things, changing Denali back to Mount McKinley, changing the Gulf name. Pete Hegseth changed Fort Bragg's name, Fort Liberty's name back to Fort Bragg, but trying to do something, keeping the name Bragg, but naming it for another Bragg. He talked about the DEI removal, talking about the feds, the military, private industry is taking his lead, which they are. They don't have to, but they are. This camera then focused on the leaders of our military sitting down in the first 2 rows. None of them had smiles on their faces. Even when the Republicans were applauding, the military leaders did not smile. And incidentally, all of the military leaders that were sitting down there, this group of military leaders, were all white. Before, 2 days before, the day after President Trump took office, he fired the leader of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was an African American, the highest ranked African American in the military, fired him, and fired 3 women, 1 white, 2 black, and so they were not sitting in the audience. They were all older white men. And when he finished talking about that, he said that the United States was woke no more. Again, weaponizing the word woke, when in fact he doesn't even know what woke means. He doesn't. And I'm not going to delve into that because this video is actually going to be longer than I intended for it to be. He then taught about how he made an executive order that there are only 2 genders in the United States that are recognized, male and female. That brought one of the loudest rumblings of applause from the Republican side during this speech. It continued when he said that he did an executive order banning trans athletes, but he didn't say it that way. He said keeping men out of women's sports. And again, I've said this in other videos. Every time they say keeping men out of women's sports, I want to know why they're so obsessed with penises. They don't even know what it means to be trans. They don't. And I would wonder how U.S. Representative Sarah McBride, who is the first trans person to win an elected seat in the House of Representatives, she is a representative from the state of Delaware. She is a trans woman, and Nancy Mace, the representative, there are words that I want to say about her, but I'm not going to say, even though on YouTube I say that my videos are not for children, just in case I slip up and do say something that I shouldn't say. But Nancy Mace is a menace. She is a menace, and she needs to be removed from office. And she has designs on running for governor of South Carolina. She represents the low country of South Carolina. That includes, I think, Charleston and Myrtle Beach in that area. Now, I am sorry that she suffered from sexual assault because she always talks about her journey of being raped, but she always talks about trans people. She calls them sexual predators, men dressing up as women to go into men's bathrooms. Well, a man who dresses up in women's clothes is actually called a transvestite. They are not a transsexual. Someone who's going through transition is a transsexual. But it's interesting to me that they're only focusing on trans women, saying that they're not really women, that they're men. They're not saying anything about trans men who were women transitioning to men. They're not saying that, which I always go back to. It's about the amount of hormones that are in your body and why they are so adamant about focusing on whether someone has a penis or not. So then they move on. He introduces Peyton McNabb, who's a former high school volleyball player, who during a game, she was hit in the head with a volleyball with such force that it caused her a brain injury, and she was never able to play again. Now, I am sorry that happened to Peyton McNabb. I'm sorry for that. But what came out of that is that they went on a campaign, apparently discovering that, and I haven't looked at that article yet, but discovering that the person who spiked the ball on the opposing team was a trans athlete. That was the only mention of that person being a trans athlete. Then President Trump kept talking about keeping men out of women's sports. That had that been a true woman, then Peyton would have been injured. They don't know that. They don't know that. So what if Serena Williams had decided to become a volleyball player rather than a tennis player, and the arm that she has with the speed of her serves had been on a volleyball? I can draw a line to say that Serena Williams' spiked ball may have done the same. This has nothing to do with whether someone is trans or not. President Trump has used Peyton McNabb's injury based on what her parents are doing and what she did to create a campaign going against women, saying that Kamala Harris, since she supports trans athletes and the trans community, that she does not, they voted for Trump because Kamala she did not want to protect women. Well, I'm here to tell you, trans women are women. Are there predators out there who dress up like women to go in bathrooms for the sole purpose of assaulting men? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And they should be arrested and thrown in jail for doing so. But that does not mean that those people should be used to convict an entire community that has nothing to do with that. So then he moved on, talking about inflation, that Joe Biden had the worst inflation rate of any president in history, and that he is doing things to attack and bring down inflation. Point of fact, the way inflation is calculated, and I had to learn this myself, a daily inflation rate is based on a rolling 12-month period. On December 31st of 2024, this is well after the election, the inflation rate, still under Joe Biden's watch, was 3%. 3%. So Joe Biden did not have the worst inflation rate in the history of this country. That was a lie. He, President Trump, does not have the lowest inflation rate in his first 40 some odd days. He does not. So let's move on. He then started saying that he was going after the energy and the commerce departments, that even as he was speaking that power plants were being built, he made it a state of emergency, saying that there was a national energy emergency. Talking about he mentioned the new Green Deal one time, which never became law. Then he invoked drill baby drill, to thunderous applause from the Republicans. Then he introduced Elon Musk, talking about Doge. When he gave out, I think there was about 15 minutes where he was just throwing out numbers like millions of dollars or billions of dollars, and all the like 22 billions of dollars from the U.S. on DEI programs. Talking about all this money in the billions about Social Security, saying that money is being sent to people who are hundreds of years old. But then the one thing that he put out there that news organizations picked up was that he said that there were $8 million done to set aside to turn male mice into transgendered mice. And you heard this laughter in the chamber. That was a lie. I might give him a little bit of grace in saying that whoever wrote this speech, either purposely or maybe they didn't know, but the money was actually spent was to make mice transgenic, which means they were injected with DNA to change their molecular makeup to see what the effect would be on them with other diseases. Had nothing to do with changing the mice's gender or the mice sexuality. Nothing. So whoever wrote that speech needs to have their hand slapped. So he kept talking about DEI. He said about that being wiped out, and he hailed Elon Musk a hero, to which Elon Musk stood up to thunderous applause. He was actually sitting in the gallery, which surprised me. I thought that he would have a seat somewhere down in the front. But I was actually surprised that he was up in the gallery, sitting over across the aisle from the First Lady. Then he moved into talking about Social Security. And then he got back on the economy, and he said this is how they were going to raise money to go against the debt. He introduced what he calls the gold card. The gold card is like the green card, only more sophisticated and better. The gold card is supposed to be $5 million that oligarchs from other country, the richest people in other countries, would be able to come into the United States on a gold card, get their citizenship, on the premise that they're going to open companies, build businesses, hire people, pay taxes, but they have to pay $5 million to get that card. And then that money would go against our debt. Really? So essentially, what he's saying is he's opening the door to oligarchs to come into the country and to do the same thing that Elon Musk is doing. Because make no mistake, Elon Musk, the Treasury Secretary, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and I might even throw Mark Zuckerberg in there, who've all kissed the ring and turned this administration into an oligarchy in the United States. Joe Biden forecasted this, but nobody listened to him. In his final address in December, he told you it was coming, and it has come to fruition. But yeah, so the richest people will be coming to this country. He even mentioned that Make America Great Again means making America rich again. I'm still not talking about the middle class or the working class. Still not talking about that. He's talking about federal workers not showing up, and that what he's doing is restoring democracy. Really, restoring democracy. He also talked about draining the swamp. Then he goes into this tirade, and the reason I call it a tirade is because of the way that he was saying it, as though he's tired of people saying that he's not going to do this. When he talked about no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security, and no taxes on overtime. The no taxes on overtime, that's the first time I've heard that. But I don't know how he's going to force companies not to tax the overtime. And if the taxing on the overtime and the taxing, those taxes stop, they got to make that money up from somewhere, which means cuts, which he did not talk about. He also said that he has an idea that he wants to make the interest rate on auto loans tax deductible. But the way to make the tax deductible is you have to buy a car that is built in the United States only. I live in the 13th largest city in the country. There are people here who own trucks. These trucks are made in the United States, Ford Ranger. I don't need a Ford Ranger, so why would I buy it? He wants to give a tax deduction on vehicles made in the United States. But he'd be hard pressed to find a vehicle, even vehicles that roll off assembly lines in the United States, are not defined as domestic vehicles. For example, one of my best friends is buying a Kia Sportage. There is a plant in Georgia that makes some of the Kia Sportages, but the Kia Sportage, even though it's built in Georgia, which is in the United States, is still defined as a foreign vehicle. Therefore, the auto loan on that vehicle, the interest rate would not be subject to being tax deductible. So again, define a domestic vehicle. But he didn't talk about that. Then he talks about tariffs, and he went on this little tangent about how beautiful that word is, and talked about the tariffs would then turn the auto industry in the United States into an auto boom, because the automakers would then have to bring the building of these automobiles back to the United States. But again, I just gave you the example. Kia has a plant in Georgia. They build the Kia Sportage. Those Sportages would not be subject to the tax deduction of the interest, and I don't think that they can skirt the tariff either. So again, he was talking about the tariffs. He used Honda as an example, who's going to build a plant in Indiana, which means jobs and good salaries. He did not mention the salaries, those are my words. But it's still a Honda. A Honda will be defined as a foreign vehicle. But to the positive side of that, if they build that plant, yes, people will get jobs. He claims his first term was successful with an at-home tariffs, saying that he's going after allies, saying that the reciprocal tariffs will happen on April 2nd. So if a country already has a tariff on us, he's going to put a tariff on them automatically. Whatever goods that they have a tariff on, he's going to put it back on them. And he says he's going after allies about that too. He says Mexico and Canada will be cut off. And then he started talking about AI. He says that OpenAI and Oracle and Apple are investing billions of dollars into plants here in the United States. First, I have heard of it. I haven't seen any announcement about that. I do know that Elon Musk tried to buy OpenAI, and the owner of AI and the board of directors essentially told Elon Musk to go screw himself because it was not for sale, but they did offer him an amount of $9.5 million to buy Twitter, to buy X from him, which he laughed at. So that's the ping pong. See, again, you've got these oligarchs going back and forth, playing with our economic lives. So then he started talking about the CHIPS Act, talking about Taiwan having doing a semiconductor production with a $1 billion investment in United States production, that Taiwan is going to give up their monopoly on the semiconductor chips and build a plant in the United States, saying that it's happening now. But if it's happening now, why didn't they make the announcement? That would actually turn some heads, saying, oh, well, he does care about the economy. No, why is he keeping this as a secret? He's saying that the trade policy will help farmers, but he didn't outline anything other than say that he loves the farmers. So then next, he introduced the parents of Laken Riley. She was I believe she went to Georgia State, or the University of Georgia Bulldogs. And then she was out jogging one morning. I remember when the story broke, that she was not found. Her body was found, and it was discovered that they say a Venezuelan immigrant raped and murdered her. Very, very sad, horrific story. And to that end, they were blaming that on Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, using Laken Riley as a weapon, as a political weapon, talking about the Laken Riley legislation that was put into place that talks about those illegal immigrants who commit these murders will be apprehended, put through, sent back to those countries. But if they can't go back to those countries, they will be kept here, go through our court system, and go to jail. But we already have laws on the books for that. I'm not saying anything or being disrespectful to the Riley family, but there's no need to weaponize this. Next, then he talks about the legal immigrants that are here. He mentioned Springfield, Ohio. He mentioned Aurora, Colorado. And of course, the Haitian immigrants did start leaving Springfield, Ohio, because of a lie that was started by a Springfield, Ohio resident that a Haitian immigrant had kidnapped her cat and were eating them, which then J.D. Vance said that his constituents, because at the time he was still a senator from Ohio, that his constituents were complaining that immigrants were, and called them illegal immigrants, that they were eating cats and dogs. And then during the debate with Kamala Harris, Donald Trump repeated that, saying, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets. And then it comes out the cat was alive and it was found in this person's basement. Then after all of that happened, the Proud Boys went marching through Springfield to intimidate them. So the Haitian families had to start taking their kids out of school. Some were intimidated, showing not to go to work. And so then it was reported a month ago after Trump got inaugurated that the families in Springfield, Ohio, the Haitian families who are here legally, were packing up and leaving because Trump said that he was going to find a way to take their legal status away. And this is supposed to be the president of peace. So we'll move on from there. That's when he talked about a 12-year-old girl named Alexis. Her mother was in the audience, where Alexis was kidnapped and murdered somewhere in Galveston Bay, and it was due to the drug cartels. He called it Cartel Island. And then Mexico was to hand over 29 drug cartel leaders that were responsible for that. And so there was legislation created. But again, using the death of someone as weaponized. And again, my heart goes out to Alex's family. And I'm glad that legislation is in place, but you don't put that on display. You don't. I've said this about Democratic presidents. You don't put this on display. You can talk about the legislation, but you don't put these people on display like they're totems. So then he called himself the president of law and order, bringing them back. He pointed at the Democrats in the audience and called them radical leftist lunatics, and said that, called out Pam Bondi, who is the director of the FBI. No, she's the Attorney General. The Attorney General, and Kash Patel, who is the director of the FBI, signaled to them to go after the opponents. Remember, both Kash Patel and Pam Bondi said there was no list, but of course they are. In fact, Pam Bondi is targeting New York, and specifically the Democrats in New York, regarding not adhering to ICE policy, but also going after the Attorney Generals there. But he said he was going to restore law and order, but he didn't spell out how he was going to restore law and order. There was a police officer's widow who was in the audience, whose husband was a police officer who had been killed in the line of duty, saying that he is a back to blue president. Yet I remind you that he pardoned 1,500 people, insurrectionists, who attacked Capitol Police. So which is it, Mr. President? Do you back the blue, or don't you? Or do you back the blue as long as they are the blue that are on your side? Now, I will say this. The best moment of the whole speech was 12-year-old DJ. I can't pronounce his actual name, but his nickname is DJ, who was in the audience, who Donald Trump said that he loves the police, and it was his goal when he grew up to become a police officer. Cute little boy in the audience with his father. Um, he was diagnosed with a terminal brain cancer. They said that he wouldn't survive, but 5 years later, he's still living. Has the brightest smile, waved and everything. And that was the best moment. And then Donald Trump said that he was going to give him yet another designation, that he was given special designation as a Secret Service member, and he was given the badge by the new leader of the Secret Service. And so there was thunderous applause of that. Again, the Democrats did not applaud that, but I understand why. I understand why. They were there in protest. Um, but I need to remind you that one of the first executive orders that Trump gave in connection with Doge is that they cut off and shut down childhood cancer research. He's praising this 12-year-old boy for surviving cancer, yet he cut off childhood cancer research. Again, stop propping people up for the sole purpose of making yourself look good. He said that, I believe it was this section where he said that there was nothing that he could say, nothing he could do, even if he discovered the the pill or the drug or something that would wipe out every disease on the planet, putting the United States back in the #1 position. That the Democrats pointing to him again that there is nothing that he could do that would make them stand or applaud or anything like that. Essentially saying, why don't you like me? And then when I was watching the speech, I was saying, well, yes, there is. There are some things you can do. Bring the people that you fired back to work. Bring all of them back to work, and then be purposeful and intentional about having the heads of these agencies find the inefficiencies and figure out how to make them more efficient. You can do that. You can restore our position in the world by putting us back in the Paris Climate Agreement, putting us back in the World Health Organization, getting us back in the Human Rights Commission in the UN. You can do all of that. If you can do all of that, I might extend you some grace. But no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that. You're trying to make the United States an isolation country. We tried that before the World Wars, and it didn't happen. And it doesn't work that way. So yes, there are things you could do, but you refuse to do them. And so having to pick and choose between two evils, I will side with the Democrats for not standing and applauding, because I understand why they didn't. Let's see, what else? He talked about chemical cancer. He talked about other cancers, called out Bobby Kennedy Jr., saying that that was a top priority for them. But again, you cut off the childhood cancer research. And then he said, make America healthy again. Then he introduced January Littlejohn, whose daughter, apparently in their school, saw other kids who were transitioning. That child went to the school counselors. The child wasn't transitioning. The child decided that they were non-binary. Ms. Littlejohn was upset about that because they did this without her permission. They wouldn't give her any information. And so Donald Trump signed an executive order saying, barring non-binary and transition information from elementary schools through high school. I believe through high school, yes. And he called it the sexual mutilation of children when it was nothing of the sort. Said that body dysmorphia is a lie. Body dysmorphia is not just in regard to gender. it also has to do with eating disorders, where someone who is simply may be carrying the smallest amount of fat, but otherwise is by definition fit and thin, they still see the fat person in the mirror. That is also part of body dysmorphia. And yet he's using that as a weapon against the non-binary community and not educating the parents on this. True, as long as that child is a minor, the parents have access, should have access to anything that happens to that child away from the house in school. I agree with that. But I would say this to parents who don't like it and will do anything to keep their child from being their true selves, whatever that might be, because they're growing, they're discovering who they are. There are millions of parents who let their children go through that. They support their children. This particular parent decided not to. And I guess that's their right. But I would caution any parent who follows their lead, make sure you're coming from a place of information and not fear. So then he talked about wokeness again, saying that wokeness is no longer in our militaries. He actually then introduced a high school student who's in the ROTC, has his designs on being in the military and getting into West Point. And so Trump pulled out an executive order telling this guy it's official. He is going to West Point, to thunderous applause. Then he talked about transition into our defense, talking about he's wanting Pete Hegseth, who is the Secretary of Defense, along with other military officials, to come up with a Golden Dome defense system. He says that Israel has it, other countries have it, the United States should have it too. He wants to bring shipbuilding back to the United States, that he's creating an office of shipbuilding. Then he goes on to talk about getting the Panama Canal back, even after the president of Panama says, not happening. Claims that he claims that he's taking it back. Then he focused on Greenland, saying that they were talking to Greenland, and then right near the end, when he was finished talking about Greenland, he said, one way or the other, we'll get Greenland, because we need Greenland for our protection. One way or another. Then he mentioned Putin at 10:45, but only for a minute. And spent some time on Ukraine, but said that he had cut off military aid to Ukraine, but said that he had received a letter from Zelensky, who is the president of Ukraine, saying that they were ready. He's ready to sit down and talk about an end to the Ukraine war. He took a jab at Elizabeth Warren. I can't remember what the tangent was on that. Took a jab at Elizabeth Warren, called her Pocahontas, I think because she was on her cell phone. The camera cut away from Elizabeth Warren, but then went back when she was laughing and applauding at him. Then he introduced Mark Fogel, who I believe was the teacher who was brought back, who was held hostage, and they made a deal to get him, finally got home. But he did mention that that process was started by President Biden, and then it was wrapped up by those officials that finally got him home. Then he talks about the American spirit, talks about the space program, that we're going to put somebody on the planet Mars at some point. And then he thanked them by saying, God bless God bless America, and God bless the USA and all of that, and ended his speech at 10:58. So again, he went for an hour and I believe 91 minutes, which broke Bill Clinton's speech length. And so now Trump can truthfully say now that he had the longest speech in presidential history. And then a senator from Michigan gave the response, who I had never heard of. So did a good job. But again, as other people are saying, the Democrats are failing miserably in messaging, and I would add to that on the messenger. Granted, maybe it was their intent to introduce us to this particular senator who has a background in intelligence and is now in the Senate. They're saying that she may be an up-and-coming Democratic star, but that's yet to be seen. But again, the Democrats they got some work to do. They got some work to do to fix themselves, and then they got some work to do to present us with some candidates, to identify some candidates for us to decide if those are the people we want in the House of Representative positions and in the Senator positions to take back the House and the House of Representatives in the 2026 cycle. And so there's my analysis of this. It's no secret. It's no secret. I am not a fan of Donald Trump. Never have been, never will be. He's going to have to do something astronomical in order for me to raise an eyebrow and even look his way in a positive way. So he can lump me into that crowd. The majority of what he said was a lie and manipulative. And while I feel a certain kind of way about Representative Al Green, I don't know that he should have done that at the beginning of the speech. I think when he was talking, when he would have, because he didn't really mention Medicare or Medicaid in his speech. He did talk about Social Security. But doing the shout out once or twice during the speech, yes. Representative Al Green afterwards said that it was his intention to get in some good trouble. He's invoking Representative John Lewis's phrase that he always used. I don't think that John Lewis would have done that. No. I think John Lewis would have taken Hakeem Jeffries' lead and not said anything, but then used his platform in other ways to go after the Republicans and Donald Trump, which I'm hoping that they will do. But the Democrats, this is not a good look. It's not. Half of you walked out, and the other half of you sat there with paddles that people have been criticizing, saying that y'all should have just sat there. It is probably one of the most divided chambers I have ever seen since I started watching the Joint Chiefs speeches or State of the Union addresses. So, again, still in the finding out phase. But like I said, pay attention, because some of this stuff is coming down the pipeline that's going to affect all of us. It is. This tariff whiplash that's going on. The firings are going to continue. So we'll see. I'm already at an hour and 3 minutes. It's about 20 minutes more than I intended to. I'm going to sign off. I didn't even talk about the 1930 Tariff Act that a lot of people are pointing to about Trump's tariffs being disastrous. Just to give you a little tidbit of it. If I can pull it up here, just to show you this. So the Tariff Act of 1930, also known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, raised tariffs on imported goods to historically high levels, aiming to protect American industries during the Great Depression, but ultimately worsened the economic situation by stifling international trade and leading to retaliatory tariffs. It actually made the economy worse. So the act was enacted during the Great Depression, a time of economic hardship and high unemployment. There was a trade decline, long-term effects, where the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act is often cited as an example of how protectionist trade policies can harm the global economy. So think about the 1930 Tariff Act when you see any information about Trump's tariffs. Not a good thing. Have a good night, and we'll see you on the next video.